In working with custom motorcycles, there's no greater metaphor for life than the wiring diagram and getting your electrical to work. Welcome to Urban Monk TV. So you are doing a custom motorcycle build of any kind, and you stripped the bike all the way down to the frame, as I have in this project, because you wanted to go that deep. You wanted that level of customization, including cleaning that frame everywhere, painting it, getting all the components off of it, but you got to put it all back together. And for many guys, it is the most intimidating and most daunting part of the project, and for others, it's no big deal. I probably fall somewhere in the middle there. I'm pretty darn comfortable with electrical work, but I'm not an electrician by trade or something like that. And I would not tackle, and I don't think anyone really should, putting the electrical system or the wiring of your bike back together without the wiring diagram. And that is if you're using the stock wiring harness. If you're going to something like an M unit, then of course not a whole lot of this is going to apply. First, you need to have your wiring diagram, because this is where you will make order out of the complete mess that's over on your bike.
Well, if you listen to my story, my pal Lightning Boy, he's gonna tell you why. My baby needs a...
Here it has some structure. Here it has clear lines and clear delineations of what color wire, it's all there. You can find these in the service manual. I'll put a link to a website from a guy named Basecliff, who has specifically Suzuki GS wiring diagrams, carb rebuild service manuals, and just service manuals in general. I'll put that below in this video so you can get your wiring diagram. But it really doesn't matter what bike you're working with, these things are all pretty similar. So the first thing is I've got a bunch of black tie straps or zip ties, but I intend to use these nice stainless ones later. I'm beginning with these just to get things in their place, and they're cheap, super cheap. And if I don't like something, I can just cut it and redo it. Cutting these and redoing is a little bit more difficult. So I'm going to do all the wiring with the black cheap plastic ones first, and then follow up by replacing these with these, and I'll just cut these off as I put one of those on. So I'm working with the stock wiring harness, but from here back there's really nothing stock about it. Obviously I'm trying to keep this wide open, and a lot of my electrical components have moved a bit further back than they used to be. So it's reasonable to think I'm going to run out of wire with the stock wiring harness. So what I've done is just done my best to open this up in places and use, like here is the rear brake light switch. I've left that in its original position and ran the wire up here where it'll be quite hidden, and then tie strapped it there, zip tie. Zip ties here, just trying to hide things back and away, and then where I could, I'm trying to use existing passages. Like here I've brought the stator wires up from the alternator generator, whatever you want to call it, and through an existing hole here, but have also zip tied this along with the wire for the gear position indicator. I'm not using the gear position indicator. I'm only using one wire from that, which is this blue one. Sorry, that is my neutral. The rest of these I'm just leaving the harness together, so I'll have to hide them up here under the tank, but I do need the neutral to be working here. So that blue wire is going to come into play. So I'll just take this a section at a time. What I want to work on first is my rectifier, because this is one of the more challenging areas for me. The stock rectifier is not what I have. I have got some generic rectifier, which is fine, but the colors of the wires coming off of that rectifier do not match what I have here. Shouldn't matter necessarily, but what I do have is the same number of wires coming off of the rectifier, which is pretty standard, should be 5 wires in total. But what I have coming off of my alternator, or some may call it the stator, is accurate as far as the wiring colors go. And I am missing this fuse. For whatever reason, whoever owned my bike before eliminated the fuse link, which seems crazy to me. So over on the bike now, sorry, gone handheld here for you. On this rectifier, you have a yellow, a white blue, and a white red wire coming off of it, plus a red. On my rectifier, sorry, I've got 3 yellow, a red, and a black. So essentially the yellow, the white red, and the white blue are all yellow. And it honestly shouldn't matter. The red is going to be critical, and the black is the ground here, so that's critical and simple. So really, black goes to ground, no issues there. Red, I know my red, I got to find where that's supposed to go, and that is supposed to tie in to a red line in the harness that then also has a 15 amp fuse coming off of it to the starter circuit. Couple of things you want to think about ahead of time before tackling your electrical wiring is connectors. Take a good look at what type of connectors are already being utilized on your wiring harness if you're using the stock wiring harness. And you're probably going to want some additional ones because you'll have new components like the headlight I got from Dime City Cycles, or those small gauges that I got from Dime City Cycles. They just come with bare wires, and somehow, some way, I'm going to tie those in to the stock wiring harness. And so on Japanese bikes, what you see a lot of, and certainly what I have on this GS550, are these bullet style male and female. These are 4mm or 0.157 inch. Little bit of advice on those: think ahead. I didn't, to be honest, and order them on eBay. They're super cheap there. And on eBay you can get some that don't have all this insulation on them. These are crimp style that I got at the local auto parts store. I don't like crimp style. If you don't get a good crimp, you don't get a good electrical connection. I prefer to solder things, and so I'm going to end up cutting away this plastic insulator around the point where the wire goes into this, and I'll probably crimp it and then solder it. Then I'll put a heat shrink over the top of that. So if you think ahead, you can save yourself a lot of money by buying these. These were probably 50-60 cents a piece when I get down to each unit, and they can be had for 2 or 3 cents a piece on eBay, buying them in some kind of a small multi-pack. And think ahead and you can save yourself some money. This stuff is not expensive. The other thing you're going to want is some kind of a multimeter, you know, a volt and ohms measuring tool. There's a couple of things I like to use. Digital is really helpful, so simple, and you get a very precise measurement from the digital readout. But there are some times where you just want to see the old-fashioned VU meter, you know, moving the needle. And so I'm not into expensive, fancy multimeters. Frankly, they give these out free with a purchase at Harbor Freight, so I've got like 5 of them, and they're completely disposable, but they work. And this one I've kept around. You can find these on eBay, just because sometimes I like to see the needle moving rather than, you know, something just coming up on my display. And it gives you different information. Good wire cutters, and then a wire stripper. This one's pretty cheap. The wire cutters are pretty bad on it, so I have this around for that purpose. But you know, that's about it. A couple other things I like. We're going to be soldering some connections, so you can get by with one of these cheap, you know, $5-6 soldering irons, but it's tough to transfer heat sometimes with this into all of the area that you want hot for your solder to really melt and flow in nicely and get a good connection. So for wiring, these little mini torches can be had for $15 to $25 depending upon where you buy them. Of course, then you need the butane refill tank also, so that's something to consider. But this is a cheap one. It doesn't have a very attenuable flame, but it does some. You can adjust the size of the flame. You want it to be a pretty small flame for wiring. That's helpful. And then electrical solder. And this is a flux core solder. So this would be different from plumber's solder. Don't use that, which typically does not have any flux in the core of it. You specifically want electrical solder. One more thing to consider is fuses. If you're using the stock rig, you can use what they gave you. I found that what came with my bike was pretty corroded, pretty brittle. The plastic housing had become brittle. These kinds of things, the ATC blade style fuses, I think I got 3 or 4 of these for about $5 on eBay. It just took a while to get here, but plan ahead, and it's a really well built thing. It's probably 14 gauge wire, at least 16 gauge, and then order the fuses that you need ahead of time. This one came with a 30 amp in there, but what the bike needs is a 15 amp, so I'll order that up and get it here, but I can wire this into place in the meantime. So let's talk about my logic here a little bit. I want to understand where one of my yellow wires coming out of my rectifier needs to hook up with a white and red line. So as I look for a white and red on my wiring harness, I'll probably find one. I might find more than one. I'll go and continue all the way down and just see what else the white and red is going to hook up with. It's going to go into the harness up to my left-hand switch controls, which is turn signals, horn, all of that stuff on the left-hand side. So that is, yeah, it terminates there into white and red, white and green, into lighting. Okay. So over on the bike, I've got my rectifier down there with the 5 wires coming out of it. Here they all are. And I know that one of these yellows is going to have to tie into this white and red wire. Hopefully you can see the red stripe to it. Now, if I follow that up the wiring harness, I should find in the plug going to my left-hand turn signals. So as I come out, come down here, I should find a white and red, and sure enough, there it is. So that's the only white and red that is coming out of the wiring harness anywhere. That's good news to me. If I'd found another one, then I'd be awfully confused. Now, here is all of the stuff that used to be hidden up underneath the headlight. And I may find a white and red in this bunch, because it was supposed to head up in there. Well, here, let's double check that. Am I right? No, the white and red terminates here, and then everything that went up to the headlight, there is no white and red. So, okay, great, I shouldn't find it there. So, you kind of see what I do there. I just follow the path of the electrons and make sure that what I'm seeing on the bike jives with what I'm seeing on the wiring diagram. Let's do another one. Here's one I found that's a little confusing. So, here I've got one of the lines coming off of the rectifier. It's a yellow wire. That's the middle one here I'm trying to point to. Comes over here, up, and ties into a yellow wire coming off of the alternator. But it shows that there is a dual plug there, and that the yellow wire coming from the regulator, there's only two wires out of the regulator, a ground and one wire. On mine, it's yellow. I don't know if I've got the stock one or not, but anyways, they're supposed to tie in here together. So I go over to the bike and I look for that. So again, you know, another one of my yellows would come. Here's my regulator with the two wires that I mentioned coming out of it. Black is ground, yellow is the the other lead. That is supposed to join up with a yellow off of my stator, but the wiring diagram shows this as a dual plug so that both of them would be tied in together. But there isn't a dual plug here. So I've got a deviation, and that is probably, since the wires coming off of my stator are color-coded in a way that matches my wiring diagram, but my rectifier does not, this is where I suspect the change happened. At some point prior to my owning the motorcycle, somebody put in an aftermarket rectifier, rectifier, and we lost that dual plug somewhere. So here's where I've got to get creative and figure out another way to wire that. So, looking at my stator wires, I've got the yellow, the white and blue, and the white and green. I know that this yellow needs to tie with a yellow from the rectifier, and then also with the yellow from the regulator. So those three wires, I have to figure out how to get them together. So I'm going to just bundle these for now and then trace the rest of them. I've already figured out that the blue and white goes into the regulator. I've already figured out the other one goes into that white and red. What's left is the white and green coming out of the alternator. And looking at my wiring diagram, here's that white and green coming off the alternator, connecting to white and green on the harness. Harness is everything. Harness is everything through here. I can see now that I have that going from the alternator stator straight into the wiring harness, white and green. What's left here is the red wire coming out of the rectifier. That ties in to a red on the harness, and also tying in off of that should be a fuse. So let's see where on my harness that all goes down. So the red wire out of my rectifier is easy enough to find, and I've got a red wire here on the harness, and I've got a red wire here. Two red wires. So how do I get to the bottom of this? Okay, well, one indicator might be that this plug is female and this one is male, and these were connected in the past. this female is probably not supposed to go to this female. So that's one way to look at it. Am I dead sure of that? 95% sure. Now, there's 5% unsure. So how else can I figure this out? Well, if, like my wiring diagram indicates, that this red and this red are indeed the same wiring circuit within the bike, I should get continuity between these two. But before I check that, I need to make sure that on the other end of my wiring diagram that there isn't some other break in the circuit that could potentially be opened, like maybe up in the ignition switch, that would make there be no continuity here. So let's do that first, but you can see where I'm going with this. I've got my multimeter out. Well, you know, my intuition here was correct. So I've got my red coming up here, follow the red through the harness, skip to the next page, come up to the front part of the harness, red comes down into the ignition switch. So in on, red and orange will have power to each other. So somehow I need to turn the ignition switch on to close that circuit here, but then where does orange go? Orange comes back to lights back here. I'm going to play with this and see if my circuit completes. I'm going to test it first without turning the switch on and see if I get continuity, because frankly the way this red is wired, it almost looks as if they're tied right here, and I'm trying to measure from here to here. What happens over here shouldn't matter. I'm going to set this up in a way where you can see it, and I'll just set it to any ohms setting here. Get my leads out. I don't know, can you see that? Hey, it's pretty dusty. Okay, when I put them together, I should come near 0. Alright, let me test my lead. Here to here. I gotta jam it in there. Okay, there's continuity there. Not getting a great connection. There we go. Alright, so now that extra 5% of doubt in my mind is really quite eliminated. This female red coming off the rectifier plugs into this male red into the wiring harness. What is the other? I'm just going to temporary. All of this is temporary right now. We're just making connections. We're not putting things where they're finally going to be. So then this guy is for my fuse, and I'll get to that later. Now getting back to my 3 yellows that need to come together. Again, I'm not permanently wiring here right now. What I'm trying to do is establish where the connections need to happen. Then I'll think about how are things going to be located, and especially where the wire is going to run so that they're hidden. And so I don't want to make permanent connections right now, because I will undo all of these as I go. But I want to just get it organized before I go to that step. So if I went ahead and started cutting and soldering things here, I'd be making a pretty permanent situation when I'm not at a permanent state yet with my project. So for now, I'll just put a zip tie on these 3 to group them together and know that that's what I'm going to join later when I get to stowing things away. So then the last things that remain on the regulator rectifier are the black ground or earth cables, and again, because I'm not at the permanent state yet, I'm just going to leave those right now. I might zip tie these, but I'm guessing somewhere back here I'm going to have a ground, like the negative on the battery is going to have to be grounded. And I just don't know quite where that's going to be located yet. I may end up drilling into this frame piece and sanding away some of the paint and having it all here. But for now, I'll just zip tie those and gather that. One more thing I'll mention is in my pursuit of moving from this mess to organized, I bought some of these rubber things here, and I can put them onto existing screws. I've already got one mounted over here to the flasher relay, and I can run wires through there and they'll just keep things tidy and tight. At this stage I want to get things connected first, but I just wanted to mention that you know, you slowly go from complete chaos and not understanding to having it organized. As a metaphor for life, it's perfect. There are just these times in your life where you might be engaged in some of the happiest, most fulfilling parts of your life, but right along with it comes challenge. And challenge is best just broken up into little pieces. At least men like to think this way, I suppose. I once read that men are like waffles, little compartments, and women are like a plate of spaghetti. I don't know if there's any truth to that. Of course it's stereotypical, of course it's generalizing. You know, there's always going to be exceptions to the rule, but when it comes to electrical wiring, you just got to make some sense of the challenge. And so that's where the wiring diagram comes in. It takes a daunting task and simplifies it into little pieces that we can get our head wrapped around. And the other piece is just to have patience with this and work at it one little circuit at a time. It's kind of like when you go into your advisor on your freshman year of college and you're embarking on a 4-year or maybe longer challenge of getting a degree, and they give you the big list of all of the classes that you've got to take in order to accomplish this very daunting task. When you're a freshman, it looks like a big deal. When you're in my shoes, when you've completed that and your master's degree and you're looking back on it and you're raising kids who are now looking forward to it, it doesn't seem like that big a deal. Life. So that's where I'm going to stop for this video, is just our alternator, stator, regulator, rectifier circuit. There's obviously a lot more circuits that I need to do, but I hope that this video helped convey some of the logic that I use as I go through a wiring diagram and try to make some sense of all my chaos here. And it's a step at a time, and it's not a big deal, honestly. If you like what I'm doing, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you'd like to become an urban monk. Thanks for watching.